Hello and welcome to this edition of A Page from History. I am Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay. It is 60 years since Satyajit Ray's classic film Pather Panchali was released. The film, which was the first part of what is now universally known as the Appu trilogy, changed the idea of how films could be made in India. The film also altered the perception of Indian cinema in the world. For 60 years, people have wondered how a film which had very little by way of story, no songs or dances, could become such a widely appreciated film. Even after 6 decades, the film runs to packed houses in India and outside whenever it is released. Pather Panchali premiered at New York's Museum of Modern Art. It was commercially released a couple of months later. It launched Satyajit Ray's brilliant career and shot India into global prominence in the world of cinema. The film remains a masterpiece for all times. To discuss Pather Panchali and its impact on Indian cinema and as to how Indian cinema is perceived in the world, I am joined by a distinguished panel of experts today. My first guest on this program is a very senior journalist, Avijit Ghosh, who works for the Times of India, has also written several books on cinema, is considered to be one of the serious pursuers of cinema, if I can call it so. Sushmita Dasgupta, well-known sociologist and an author, someone who's worked very intensively on popular culture and cinema, who did a very landmark study on the impact of Amitabh Bachchan and the making of Amitabh Bachchan as far as films are concerned. Finally, I have Satish Padmanabhan, another very senior journalist who's an expertise in what we call in journalism the back of the book sections of a magazine, currently working with Outlook at a very senior position. Welcome to the program, all of you. Avijit Ghosh, let me begin with to try to understand. When we say that Pather Panchali is a very iconic film, now we got to first of all understand as to why do you consider Pather Panchali at a personal level to be such an important film that merits really to be discussed at length even today, 60 years after it was made.
See, we have all grown watching different kinds of cinema.
Yeah.
And the thing that I find unique about Pather Panchali is it's what I call beauty in simplicity. You know, it is timeless. It's
Right.
like a poem,
Right.
which reaches out and engages with us at a very personal level,
Right.
and at the same time at a universal level.
Right.
That is what I find something
Unique
about the
to
film.
Pather Panchali.
Yeah.
Sushmita, your first. But what makes Pather Panchali the Pather Panchali that needs to be talked about? Why are we talking about it today?
Actually, very frankly speaking, Nilanjan, I think that Pather Panchali did gain a recognition for Satyajit Ray as a filmmaker, but to the larger style of popular filmmaking, I don't think Pather Panchali had much of an impact. But to me and all the Bengalis of that point of time, see, Pather Panchali was a great film because it brought into the cinematic medium the floral and the effervescent prose of Vibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay. And Vibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay has been very central to the Bengali psyche. I think that illustration, the emergence of Pather Panchali, Amatir Bhepu, you know, as a film, as Pather Panchali, was very, very crucial to the Bengali sensibilities and also the Bengali culture, which developed in a certain way, probably after, I would say, after this film.
Satish Padmanabhan, besides tackling this issue as to why do you think that Pather Panchali is an iconic film, there's also something which needs to be presented by you. You know, Avijit Ghosh and Sushmita Dasgupta, coincidentally also me, all happen to be from Bengal,
Yeah.
where this film is made from. It is at some level also needs to be talked about that how much of the film is unique to Bengal and how much of it is universal to India.
Sure. You know, the first part, as they were just pointing at also, it's like, I think there are, these breakout films happen
Right.
at certain times, you know. It could be in any genre. I mean, it could be, Fellini's 8.5, Bicycle Thief.
Right.
It could even be Scorsese's Taxi Driver,
Right.
or Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. These are breakout films, which are timeless. I mean, you can watch
You
them
can
anytime.
keep on going back to
all
them
the
every
time. I think I must have seen Pather Panchali with subtitles only maybe once,
Right.
in college or something. After that, I don't need to, see it with subtitles at all, because actually, even if you don't follow the language, I mean,
It's such a visual film.
yeah,
that you
it's
really do not.
actually there are hardly any dialogues. Even if there are, you don't really need to understand
guide
it.
you
It's
through
such a
the-
visual. Actually, if you see the film, what is it? It's as you were saying. It's simplicity. It's about rain. It's about sun. It's about cat, dog. There's a spider, cow. Plants, trees, streets, people, wedding, death, birth. It's just this. I mean, it's just really our life, actually. I mean, with, of course, a sort of a thin storyline sort of weaved into it, but it's just a slice of really rural life of that time. So it has a connect like that. Any human being, I think, would just connect to it. It's really about nature, about about villages. In fact, that one shot where the train does pass through the screen, it's such a, I mean, it's such breaks the
Many
peace.
people look at it differently. Some interpret it as the sign of, or very symbolic of modernity approaching, and
and the dread,
clashing with,
of course. I mean, no, and absolutely, it's true. And there is a dread, though. It breaks the serenity somehow.
Right.
That one shot. When the kids run and want to catch the train, and the camera goes this
I was
side.
reading somewhere that was probably the first sequence which was shot.
Yeah, perhaps it's and and Ray's the storyboarding of it is so meticulous. I mean, it's what he has in the storyboard.
No real
it's
script. It was just actually sketches and.
That's
his
right,
notes.
and it
That's
just, I mean,
how it
his
evolved.
visual thing to capture it, and in the end, how it is on screen, it's just.
And this other question, this point. Was it unique to Bengal, or was there a universal Indianness to Pather Panchali?
I mean, I would say it is actually a universal, not just Indianness. It's just a universal film. Any country which is getting into the industrialized phase.
The transformation from a rural setup to an urban setup.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll just say one thing,
Yeah.
that in all these over the years, the Sight and Sound magazine, they have this poll of the best cinemas in the world, where the top 100 film journalists or top film critics, they come together.
They come and list the films.
Yeah, they list the films. And Pather Panchali has been
Consistently in that
there
list.
in the top 10.
Right.
So most of these are actually, I think more than 90% of them are either European or American journalists. So the very fact that over the decades, the film has been able to, they have been able to identify, empathize, and enjoy the movie and appreciate it, shows that there is a universality.
No, there is definitely universality, because I was reading
and
that to mark the 60th anniversary of the film being released in New York, there have been festivals, there have been recent releases done, including the digitized, restored prints of Pather Panchali and the two other films of the Oppu trilogy. And they have been welcomed with tremendous enthusiasm in American audiences.
If I may make a point,
Yes.
in fact, as you just said, when it was shown in Museum of Modern Art in New York, it didn't have subtitles.
Yes, in fact, it couldn't be ready. That's
It
what I
wasn't
was-
ready.
It
So
wasn't
it was,
ready.
in fact, it went, if I remember
rushed.
right, it was rushed, and it was part of something like, ornamental arts and textiles of India was the exhibition. And this was one evening they just showed, and the audience was so bowled over by it. With no subtitles, imagine. I mean, somebody coming from so far away, set in a rural West Bengal, setting, and it just bowled everybody over then. In fact, I think, it got released, the release took 3 years in the UK. They took that much time to get the subtitles going. I suppose the technology wasn't this good then.
Technology was not, in fact, in
There's
terms
a
of the.
small thing which I want to add to
Right.
Padmanabhan's thing, that Dwight, the storyboard, you're talking about the storyboard, actually before making the film, Satyajit Ray was actually the illustrator of Pather Panchali when it was published
did
by
it for the-
Signet
right,
Press.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
That's
he
right.
actually did all the sketches.
Yeah.
Right.
And that is when he read the book for the first time.
Yeah.
And one small point about his universality, I was reading somewhere that today, even today, about 80-85 countries or more than that, they have, Pather Panchali is shown consistently over the last 60 years. Every day in one country in the world, it is estimated that somewhere Pather Panchali is being shown.
Somebody is
I think
watching.
that's
Pather.
Somebody is
amazing,
watching
for
Pather
a-
Panchali. Yeah.
You know, if it is
There's an official show.
something like that, you know, is amazing. You know, I
Yeah.
wonder that you know, which other you know, classic great film you know, has that kind of a consistent footprint, if I can actually you know, use the word. But this point, you know, which Sushmita had raised, you know, definitely a slightly contentious one, that Pather Panchali may have been a great film. It might have tremendous impact as far as all of us here. But in terms of its long-term impact on Indian cinema, a big question mark.
Yeah.
Do you agree with
In
it?
fact, you know, if we go back, when it was released, it got such a lukewarm response. I mean, you know, the week it was released in West Bengal, it didn't do, I mean, it didn't stir any.
But eventually it became a big
Yeah,
success.
you know, actually, you know, I think Desh published a, you know, Desh used to publish this one column review
Right.
of some films, because, you know, it was considered a literary magazine,
Right.
not all, only important films. I think they did a 1.5 page review of Pather Panchali at the third week or so of the release, and then it sort of, you know,
Yes, I guess, you know, as you said, you know, that some films come which break away from what is happening, so people had to realize that yes,
Yeah.
something had broken away and they could relate to what
it's
had broken
completely
away.
something new, you
Because
know.
whenever there is something new, there is always this tremendous hesitation that whether you want to
Absolutely.
take it or not. It's very simple, even like that, that when you're suddenly served a new dish which one has never eaten, you are actually very hesitant that is it going to taste nice or not, whether I should try it or
Absolutely,
not,
yeah, it's
or whether it is going to become
yeah.
very troublesome for me to swallow.
Let me
So
tell you a
that
very
is-
interesting anecdote. You know, Raj Thapa, in a book all these years, she writes that she saw Pather Panchali and something happened to her. You know, it's like she got goosebumps or something. And then she called up Raj Thapa, Ramesh Thapa,
Ramesh,
Ramesh Thapa, and she said, you know, I saw a movie, and the first movie that puts India has arrived in world cinema. And he says, what nonsense, what are you talking about, you know, I don't think that's going to happen.
Right.
But she says, you know, she writes like that this is how she felt.
Yes.
And, you know, within the same group was a gentleman who wrote a review, you know, in Times of India. And he used a pen name called Adib, and he wrote that.
Right.
And that's the only film review he ever wrote in his life.
Right.
And it's a fabulous review.
So I
and
think
it's actually done by
I think
Mr.
the very
Shamlal.
fact that
Shamlal,
just
yeah.
one review and that too of that particular film is a great hallmark of a great film. We'll take a little break and then come back and resume this conversation. One of the features that made Pather Panchali cinematically a legendary film was that the little boy who portrayed the role of Apu, Shubhit Banerjee, the child actor, never acted before and did not face the camera again. Till reports last came in, he lived an anonymous life till a few years ago. A film was made some time ago exploring his life, and it was called Opur Panchali. The film raised very difficult existential questions regarding child artists and how they cope with fame as a child. Be with us. This program will continue. Welcome back to a page from history. It is 60 years since Pather Panchali was released and elevated the status of Satyajit Ray as among the best directors of all times. Sushmita Dasgupta, when we talk about Satyajit Ray's film, we simply cannot miss, you know, I'm not talking only about Pather Panchali or the subsequent films, especially even Opur Shongshar, where the little boy Kajol becomes, you know, Opu's son. Subsequent films also, be it Shonar Khela or several other films, you know. Child and Satyajit Ray. Remarkable ability to get a child to perform. You know, that's been noted by a large number of people who have written about cinema. You know, what do you think, you know, is really possibly have caused this kind of ability to get a child to act like that?
Because despite his, you know, heavy weather demeanor, Satyajit Ray himself was
He's
a
such
child.
a very frightening demeanor, you know.
Demeanor, yes, and a booming voice. But Satyajit Ray himself was a child, because you see the way he
The child
writes.
in him was always alive. That's what you're
No,
trying to say.
his image, self-image was of a child.
Right.
Before he made Pather Panchali, it was his challenge to change the paradigm of cinema, because he said that why should every cinema show romantic and erotic love? So for him, you know, the much higher kinds of love were sibling love, love between a parent and a child, love between friends like Gupiga in Baghavine. And I think that this kind of the behavior itself was adolescent. He suspected erotic love, he suspected adulthood in its fully developed sexuality, and the way he wrote, he was, of course, he was a very maverick filmmaker, but his major commercial appeal lies in him being a children's writer of children's book, editor of a children's magazine. So I think that he was basically a child. So he always spoke to children as a child would. And one or two times I have happened to have interacted with him because I was a subscriber of Shandesh, and sometimes he would sit in the editor's office
Right.
and have some.
And you just went in and met him.
No, but there was a once I had to hand in over a submission which I wrote on my umbrella and myself. So and he sort of suggested some editorial changes.
Yes.
So I felt that he spoke the language of a child. He was not a adult speaking.
So if needed, he could speak to a child like any child would. If he
Yes.
had to speak to adults, he would speak
And with dead
as adults.
seriousness, So I think he was basically a child. His
think very
mental age
important,
was
yes.
mental age was never beyond the middle teens.
That's a remarkable thing for you to say, that mental age was never anything beyond teens. Satish Padmanabhan, moving on from just Pather Panchali, when we look at, when we talk about Pather Panchali, we have to also talk in terms of the composite Appu trilogy when we talk about. At one level it is basically just a matter of, the growing up of a little child in the film, the middle film, Aparajito, goes from the village to a city, not doing very well, come back into the village, and then eventually comes back into the city. What kind of relationship is being explored between the characters and the India of that time?
Yeah.
There is a parallel development story.
Yeah.
There is a parallel political story, which
Yes.
is not expressed explicitly like
Yeah.
any other filmmaker would have probably, but it is inherent.
And it's also quite.
So how do you find it being manifest?
And I think it is also quite complex. I mean, in the sense that it is not, I don't think it's very straight that, the rural life is all idyllic and,
No, definitely
very,
not.
or, urban life is all problems. And, it's, I mean, like say Mahanagar, if you
Right.
see, it's like, it's a, so, I mean, his, I think, relationship with, yes, I mean, he does show this transition as,
Right.
I mean, Pather Panchali is 55, so it's about, we are only 8 years into independence, so, I mean, I suppose at that time, this, train is coming, people are leaving
It's a
the
period of
villages.
transition, people going from villages to urban
So
cities.
it's, I think, captures it in a rather complex way. And if I might actually point out, in Pather Panchali itself, there is a sequence, if you remember, after Durga's death, that sister's dying, the boy would, Appu, is a kid. I mean, he would just run out of the house. In fact, the road is such a motive in the film throughout.
Exactly, yes.
So he would run down the road so many times when it's raining, and, as kids do, with chest up and, jauntily.
Yes.
After the death, there is a sequence where he comes out of the house to go out of the house, and he looks at the clouds, and it looks like it may rain. He goes in, gets an umbrella, and gets a little sort of a shawl to wrap around himself. And till now his sister has been combing his hair. And this is the one time when he's combing his hair himself. How he's grown
Suddenly becoming
in that
mature.
one scene. I mean, it's like it's a coming of age in just 2 minutes. Of filming, and the jaunt is gone from his run. It's slightly stooped. He's already like an old man actually. So I mean, this thing sort of he builds upon in the.
In fact, this is something, Abhijit, when you talk about the growing up of Appu in Pather Panchali, it's basically, if you look at the entire trilogy, he grows up through several experiences with death. They come at very defining moments of the character's life, be it as a child, he first sees his grandaunt's dead body. Immediately after that idyllic railway train sequence, one piece being shattered by one oncoming industrialization, as well as peace being shattered by something which is very a natural process. How do you look at this, the treatment of death and the manner in which the experience tells on the characters in the films?
I think Sushmita would be a better person to talk about it. Because
Suggestion from Vijay, definitely. Sushmita, yes?
Actually, we have to look at the Bengali literature and the Bengali sensibility in the context of death.
Right.
Much of Tagore's, best of Tagore's works have been a management of pain of death. So, Vibhuti Bhushan, lot of management of pain with death. So I think that even in case of Satyajit Ray, he himself has grown up through death, because he lost his father when he was just 2.5 years old,
Right.
and then his story has itself being a series of deaths. So I think that, you know, Opu's growing, more than Opu's growing up, Opu grows beyond the pain of death, as if he's, you know, overcoming one sorrow after the other. And I think that the management of death in a kind of a Bengali setup, the nuclear family setup, the rather precarious existence of a very close-knit family. I mean, had Opu been in a joint family, you know,
Then there would have been bigger cushions.
Bigger cushions. So you are left without a cushion, and then you have a sense of the aristocracy, because inwardly Harihar was an aristocrat, because he was a writer and he was a drama artist.
Plus a Brahmin.
He's and he's an upper caste. So I think that, you know, these kinds of bareness of life and extreme precarious balance upon which life and its emotions dwell, and how precarious these emotions become in the face of impending poverty or death, you know, I think that is the tragedy and also the pathos of Pather Panchali.
Even in Jalsa Ghar,
Right.
we see the management of death.
Right.
Because-
Jalsa Ghar is a remarkable example.
Because when it's the dying of the son, you know, which is like a nagging dagger in the throat of Chobi Biswas, and his whole
It's also dying order,
Yeah.
a social
So,
system,
yeah.
an,
So it is
an economic structure.
So dying of feudalism and the death that happens in the family. So it's like a parallel stories, you know, the social reality and the personal experience, you know, they two fuse. So Ray in that film also is you know, like Jalsa Ghar also is about management of death in that sense.
Satish Padmanabhan, when we go back to this other question, you know, we are talking about Pather Panchali, but the question is that what did it do to Indian cinema?
Yeah.
You know, let's come back to that.
Yeah.
That what did it do to Indian cinema on a long-term basis? What is the impact of that? How are Indian films perceived in the world today? And also, how much of impact has Satyajit Ray had on other filmmakers, including senior, other filmmakers, be it from Bengal or be it from outside? You have two other great giants from Bengal making films from around the same time, Mridal Sen and Ritik Ghatak.
Yeah, you know, it's a you know, as she was pointing out to, it's a difficult question really to answer as to, you know, how much impact Pather Panchali specifically and Satyajit Ray in general had, you know, for Indian films. I mean, you know, I would say, you know, the parallel movement probably, I mean, you know, it was a kind of a, you know, the germ of it was Pather Panchali, you know, say an Adur or an Arvindan, or even, you know, Balachandar making films the way they made. Maybe, I mean, you know, it probably not a direct impact like that, but you know, you know, I think the basic thing is that there was a that you could make films like this. You know, that, you know, film didn't
You
have,
could break from the formula. You did
yeah,
not
you
have
know,
that song and
that's right.
dance
I mean, you know,
sequence.
or
You know, it
yeah.
was no longer essential, and you could also, more importantly, go outside and shoot.
So I would say something like, even say, you know, after a point you say, see something like a Satya, for instance.
Right.
You know, again it's got some elements, you know, it's breaking the mold,
Right.
you know, of the films that are being made at that time.
At that particular time.
Yeah.
yes.
See, before Pather Panchali, Indian cinema did not exist in the mind map of the world.
Right.
You know, you always need one movie, one director.
To carve a niche for
Niche for
yourself.
yourself,
Yes,
to
the
your-
genre
yeah.
in the international
Yeah,
cinema,
yeah.
Indian cinema arrived.
Yeah,
And
Indian
I think-
cinema arrived.
I think that's an important point.
Yeah.
It's time for me to take another break at this point. We'll come back and resume this conversation. Whenever I go back to the Apu trilogy, the poignant treatment of sensitive scenes raise goose pimples on my skin even today. Be it numerous experiences that Apu has with death, the intimacy between the protagonist and his wife, or the optimistic walk into the future in the last film, Ray's expertise in the understatement cannot leave one untouched. Yet, the film was accused of exporting India's poverty for personal benefit. How could such an insensitive comment ever be made? Stay with us. This program will continue. Welcome back to a page from history. 6 decades ago, Satyajit Ray's Pather Panchali gave a new identity to Indian films. It remains one of the cinematic classics. Satish Padmanabhan, I had referred while going in for the break to this hugely insensitive comment that films like Pather Panchali, not just Pather Panchali, basically export India's poverty, that they go and sell Indian poverty outside, just the way one time India used to be presented the land of snake charmers. India is being presented as a land of people where people die.
I mean,
How much of
I would say it's a rather narrow sort of way to look at a film like that. It's because it's basically trying to show what's there. I mean, in the sense that it in fact
it's a completely realistic film.
and
it's
on
not
the other hand,
in
it's
any
full
way.
of little pleasures. In a person, in a family's life which is so poor. In fact, I'm told, I mean, I'm not a Bengali and I'm not like a big Bengali scholar in that sense, but I'm told that even, Bibhuti Bhushan's book, when it came in 1929, people did say that, as opposed to Tagore or Sarachandra Chatterjee, this is a book.
The milieu is
This is a book looking at rural India, though others
Yes.
wrote on it too, but not from above, but from within, I mean, the book happens organically from a rural setting, and I think that's transposed quite beautifully in the film, though there are various points at which the film deviates from the book actually. But this essence of being really immersive, you really you feel, as a viewer, you feel that you are there in that village with this family, looking and hearing their as you said, cries of help or of hope. So I mean, I think it would be I don't think it's a fair charge.
right. When he's talking about the book and
Yeah.
Pather Panchali that does deviate, there's one remarkable feature which is there to most of Ray's films, that almost all of them, barring a few, maybe Kanchenjunga is among those few exceptions, have been based on either literary works which have been written by others, or they have been written by him, the part of Satyajit Ray's own previous writings. What does this demonstrate? This not working with a new script written specifically to make a film on. What,
Yes.
how do you look at this, to a pre-existing piece of literature and then converting it into cinema, at the end of which the cinema is a standalone thing which cannot be evaluated as a work of literature.
Actually, according to Satya, I'll use his own
Yes,
writings.
let's
and
try to understand,
Yes, from his own point of
Yes.
view, from his own writings. You see, one of the things that, of course, he was not averse to using scripts which were specifically developed for films, because Kanchenjunga, he wrote it himself, and also I think there were few others as
Few
well.
others, yeah.
And of course then Sonar Killa and Gupigain Bakabain, they were part of, Gupigain was his grandfather's
Yes, that was a
writing, and
writing,
Sonar Killa and Joy Baba Phelunath were part of his novels.
Part of his.
See, one of the things which Satyajit Ray says, that why he wanted to make Pather Panchali into a film, was there was a lot of filmic element in it. See, he was an illustrator, and he comes from a family which was almost the pioneer in the invention of printing technology,
Right.
as well as of the photograph. So therefore, I think that he has some kind of a responsibility in using these technologies to rewrite the novels which already exist. So I think that the kind of paintings which people do, they click a photograph and then they use colors on it. His art was basically that. I mean, he already used a photograph, which was the novel, and then he used his own camera, which he treated as to be his own brush, his own paint brush, and redid those kinds of works.
And he tells Ranua, when he comes to Calcutta, I think to film The River,
Yeah.
when he met, so he says
That is the first time that when Renua suggests to him that you should actually
yeah,
make a
and he
film.
says how he's lived with this book for so long in his head and wanting to make a film out of it.
He wanted to actually make, the choice that he initially had. He had two choices. One was Pather Panchali, the other was Ghore Baire. He wanted to make a film either of these two. And it is interesting that he goes back to Ghore Baire towards the end of
What
his...
would have happened if it had been the reverse? You've watched a lot of Satyajit Ray's films, we've all studied this. Now, just a hypothetical situation. Suppose a film like Ghore Baire had been made 3.5 decades ago, before it was eventually made, around the same time as Pather Panchali would have, and Pather Panchali would have made. How would it have been different?
You see,
The basic difference is that, Ghore Baire, everything, by and large, everything takes place inside. It's all an interior film.
Yeah.
The reason as to why Pather Panchali breaks so much of ground is because he takes filmmaking outside into actual locations.
Yeah.
So that advantage would have been lost.
Yeah, in fact, he was told also by many people when he wanted to make the film initially that actually it is very difficult to make this film because you have to take the whole thing outside and it's not possible to shoot the whole film outside. That was one of the problems that he was told. One of the points that he was making earlier, you know, I just wanted to go back to the earlier thing that he was saying, you know, that he exported poverty and all. You see, except for some of his films, many of his films actually don't deal with poverty.
No, they don't.
They don't.
In fact, the most turbulent period when he was making films, you know, the period in Bengal, you know, it was turbulent in the late 60s and early 70s. Every filmmaker made films, the top three Bengal directors, but Satyajit Ray's films are possibly the most subtle politics. Jana Aranya, for instance, you know, one of the most, you know, the universality of the idea of middleman, you know, conveyed such a powerful political statement.
In fact, that is another charge leveled against him, that he was too Bhadrlok, you know, his films are too urban, and you know, I mean, apart from this,
to directly, there's an absence of direct, you know.
Well, yes, if you compare Mrinal Sen, who was making films, you know, Calcutta 71, it's a sheer cinematic pamphlet.
Yeah.
You know, in contrast, Satyajit Ray's any of the three Calcutta trilogy films are not in any way direct politics, yet they do. Yes, there is a politics happening behind.
The way I see it is, we are all a certain kind of filmmaker,
right?
And we should be true to what we are,
right?
So I think, you know, this whole humanism, which was the basic, you know, the undercurrent, you know, the current of his work, you know, he's not a pamphleteer. He does things very subtly. He's very, very nuanced in what he does. Even when he's talking about love, you know, he's very nuanced. When he's talking about politics, he's very nuanced. You know, Hirok Raja Deshe has some, you know,
I think it has possibly one of the biggest political statements.
Yeah, emergency.
When schools and you know, textbooks are banned.
CPM, it's not the emergency. The CPM was.
But Gopi Gayan is such satire. I mean, it's, you know, though it's
so there is a lot of underlying politics in Satyajit Ray's films, which does not come across as directly as it does probably in the case of several other filmmakers.
Actually, Satyajit Ray has his own politics, which you have to understand, you know. And one of the reasons, there are basically two reasons why he uses the novels so much. Because one, by his own admission, he needs novels as a prop. By another subtle, I mean, which he never wrote about, and you know, this is a more subtle kind of an implication, inference, is that he is one person who is pursuing the authenticity of Bengali culture, which is why Rituparna Ghosh later, who was also pursuing authenticity of Bengali culture, was so influenced by Ray. In fact, many of his films are remakes of Ray's films, you know. So I think that was Ray's politics. With Hirok Raja Deshe, Ray sort of falls in line because he has to go on making films, then he makes some political films, and I think that once he starts becoming a kind of you know, he becomes a kind of an expressed political ideologue, fighting or getting into the quagmire of the democratic politics all around him, then his films also lose sheen. Of course, that
when does it lose sheen, according to you?
It does, because you see, for instance, Ghore Baire is hardly Ray material. I mean, if you look at his handling of Rabindranath earlier,
Charulata, for instance,
Ghore Baire is nothing compared to Charulata, and yet the processes of filmmaking, making Charulata and Ghore Baire were pretty similar, because Ray struggled with the non-visual elements of Tagore. Tagore was writing too much about minds, sparing too little effort on the details of the periphery or the atmosphere or the architecture. So Ray had to actually imagine all of that. And
but his imagination was probably much more fertile during the time he made
Charulata, because Charulata was his very authentic kind of a film.
There couldn't have been a more iconic sequence than actually showing Charulata looking using the binocular than to actually show the alienation.
You know, if I can just make a small point here, that you know, the impact which Satyajit Ray had on the Indian cinema or Bollywood cinema, I really have no idea, but on the Bengali cinema he had an enormous amount of impact, because Satyajit Ray is a person, though he says that he's always stepped out of the formula, which he has, but he has created almost every kind of Bengali stereotype character.
I think he has also had an impact on the Indian middle class and upper middle class psyche, you know, because when we are a newly born nation, every newly born nation, you know, looks for benchmarks of excellence. And it is very important that somebody excels at the world level. That gives you the kind of confidence as a nation to say that yes, we can do it, we are one of the best. And Ray was not just Pathir Panchali. So he does Aparajito, it gets the Golden Lion in Venice.
Right.
Then he gets the Balinal, the best film in Balinal, Mohanagar and Charulata.
Right.
Then Ashwini Shanket, again, in
It's again a
1973.
very political film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We cannot, the politics of the famine,
Yeah.
is very important.
But again,
It's again
it's very subtle. It's layered.
Yeah, yeah.
It's layered. It's subterranean.
Politics is like absolutely below the surface.
Yeah.
So that's, I keep on coming back to you, Satish, because this is something, when we keep on talking about, India is a country of diverse cultures. We keep on talking about India's diversity. We have had great filmmakers. We have had, besides Ray, virtually every region that you can think of, has had, great Indian cinema makers. Now, how much of this is actually typical to those regions, and how much of is the issue of universality? When Sushmita talks about Satyajit Ray, she or any person who is actually steeped in Bengali culture is looking at it primarily with through the eyes of the culture of Bengal, which is part of her psyche.
Yeah.
Now, when somebody like you sees it, how do you see it? Or somebody like when I see, say, Adur Gopalakrishnan, for instance. How would you describe the process of seeing the
it's you might miss a very fine detail of politics of that place or of that era,
or of a culture,
or of a culture,
a very
but
specific
that
habit.
may be, but on the overall, I don't think it sort of you have to belong to a place or a culture to appreciate. For that matter, why only India? Then Italian films or Russian films or Tarkovsky. The way we sort of relate to them, Bergman.
Right.
There's hardly any connect between a tropical hot country like ours and Sweden. But we do. There is. It's not about you do realize. Kieslowski. You understand all of it, what he's trying to say. It's just about generally life.
Right. Basically,
just to add to what you're saying,
very quickly, I have to
Agantuk, Agantuk was a much bigger hit in Paris than in Calcutta.
Right. So basically what we are talking about, that cinema, can be universal. It is not actually to be seen. You do not have to read the subtitles to be able to see cinema. It's such a visual medium. The success or the failure of the director is how much you are able to communicate to the person who comes from a different cultures of yours. And I think so. Here, Satyajit Ray was a great success because he's able to take his film beyond Bengal, though people from Bengal would possibly look at it from the perspective of the culture in which they have grown up in. I'll take a little break and then come back to this conversation. One of the most remarkable features that I have found in the Apu trilogy is that none of the films end on a definite note. The ending always marked a point of transition in the lives of the characters. We'll continue this debate. Be with us. Welcome back to a page from history. It is 60 years since Pathir Panchali was released. Indian cinema could not ignore this film after this. Avijit Ghosh, we have been talking about Indian cinema as to how, with Pathir Panchali, Indian cinema arrived on the international arena. 60 years down the line, has Indian cinema gone beyond this arrival, or how is Indian cinema perceived today?
I would say the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s, Indian cinema was a far bigger name or far more respected on the world stage than it is today. You see, in those, if you grew up in the 60s, 70s and 80s, every year we used to come across, this film has got an award there, this actor has got an award in that international festival. We remember, Om Puri getting the Carlo Ivari award. We remember Nasir getting, the award. These days, we might have a lot of presence, market-wise, in all these big film festivals, but barring the rarest of the rare exceptions, like Masan recently, this year we got an award, and Haider got one very small award last year. But barring these, our filmmakers are unable to win major awards, and even our actors, not winning major awards. So to that extent, the gains that we had made, through the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s we have lost out to some extent in the last
let's
few
throw
decades.
open. You know what Avijit is saying? Yes, as far as if you look at the raw data, yes, he definitely has a point. Now, if we try to explore as to what is possibly the reason, it could happen due to several reasons. One, it can happen due to generally the changing international scene as far as this festival circuit is concerned. There has been a certain amount of transition in the last 2.5 decades. There's also this huge presence of the market, you know, where the media, and since the media gets satisfied, society also gets satisfied with this huge presence. We have our top actresses, you know, walking the ramp at Cannes, and we think that we have bagged enough because, you know, our top actors and actresses have gone and got great page one pictures in the French newspapers or television channels. You know, how do you look at the changing international perception of Indian cinema?
See, I think that today Indian cinema is, in a way, far more respected in the sense that Karan Johar has almost captured the Western sensibilities and brought them to have a taste in Bollywood. So the song and dance routine, the formula film is
we have been able to ensure that it has become part of theirs.
Yes.
Slumdog Millionaire is part of Bollywood.
But that's
part
not
of
Indian cinema.
But is that Indian cinema?
Yes, it is.
It is.
It is because that's
You are a great, you know, student of popular culture. That is what I'm saying. You know,
Yes,
can films like Pather Panchali, can we expect it to be consistently made? It will not beyond a point be a popular success.
No, that is the reason is that you see the kind of people who make Pather Panchali. Those kinds of people are very rare and are getting increasingly marginalized, if not decimated. For instance, a person like Satyajit Ray, if we look at basically the kind of award-winning films which had won accolades, international recognition in the 50s and 60s, were films basically with a very important, you know, sense of marginalization of the intellectual, of the thinking person, of the elite in this wave of democracy that brought in a lot of plebeian elements. Actually, democracy has its good things in promoting equality, but like Alan Turing and Thomas Carlyle, I mean, there are people who get totally shocked by all kinds of people entering the space.
Yeah.
I mean, if I may, you know, it's not so much about maybe winning awards. You know, I think somehow, you know, the way things happen, there is a time and place for something. You know, in the sense that look at, you know, the new wave, the French wave. You know, the new wave in France. Where is French cinema now? You know, in between we had Iranian films. There were such fantastic films being made by, you know, in Iran. It's sort of, I mean, they are still being made, but it's not like that.
But yes, it is not
you know,
such
Russian
a big trend.
films, you know, the Tarkovsky's films, you know, it's like they come and go, you know. I mean, it's...
see, in 2011, Iran came out with a film by, you know, A Separation, an exceptional film which got lots of awards on the international circuit. We haven't come anything nearby close to it. What I'm saying is, that, you see, another thing is, you know, I disagree with Shushmita on this, that Karan Johar has, you know, has ensured that, you know, we have got become very big in the commercial side of the marketing side.
Karan Johar going and ensuring that that Bollywood, Indian cinema need not go, Hollywood needs to come to India, and that is the arrival of Indian cinema on the international
No, my
stage.
point is, in the 50s and 60s, we were as big outside commercially as we are now. The only difference is, I have got data to show that in the 60s we were being shown, and we existed far more in the mind maps of Africa and Asia and Eastern Europe than we are now. It is only that at that point of time the monetization was not as much. Right now we have created those distribution chains, so even if 5-6 films, you know, like say like, you know, My Name is Khan, or, you know, one of these like Three Idiots and all, they are making big, we are thinking that we are doing. In the 50s, 60s, and you know, we were much bigger, even in the small towns.
So Shushmita, let's you know, would you say that globally there is a change in the taste of the kind of cinema which people want?
Actually, Indian cinema at that point of time, you see, we were leaders of decolonization. So we were masters of the South-South. We were absolutely the champions of the marginalized and the large periphery of the world. So Africa, even the socialist countries, even people were being named after Raj Kapoor and Nargis. So you see, this large periphery to the Western world, India was a great champion. Today the problem is that this large periphery to the Western world no longer probably exists in the same kind of moral space as it used to do earlier. After 90s, the economic liberalization, the globalization, it's only America.
So India has lost the moral halo, that's what you're trying to say.
See, today if you have to belong to the world space, you have to belong to the Americanized world. And that is where Karan Johar is.
No, but that.
So we are running with the foxes
no,
actually
but that
now.
is where the uniqueness of a country, of a culture shines through. I mean, if you are going to clone, I mean, if you are going to be a clone of this Big Brother Hollywood, which, that is, I think, why the Iranian films, why did we like them? It's because it's about Iran. It's not because they were aping, rom-coms.
while just talking, reading about this program, also thinking, Pather Panchali was preceded by Do Bigha Zameen.
Yes.
Remarkable film,
Yeah.
remarkable for its realistic style of filmmaking and also for its socialistic style.
Absolutely.
A very stark film. The point is that for the last 10 years in India, you have had this entire debate on land. For the last 2 decades, you have had farmer suicide grabbing headlines. In a way, Do Bigha Zameen was, preceded all this. Why don't today's filmmakers look at this? Why are they increasingly making film for the multiplex audience, which is very comfortable with their middle class milieu? It's just an occasional film which comes and disturbs somewhat, but is peoply life for it comes and disturbs a bit, but yet then again is targeting the middle class value of the media, the trivialization of news by the media.
You see, that's what I'm saying. That you see, when we discuss, the entire debate that we are having between India shining and India invisible. When we discuss that in terms of what the state is doing and what the state is ignoring. So that is the Bollywood also has to be investigated in the same touchstone. That what Bollywood is doing and what it is ignoring. And let me just say a few things. One is that we have the highest number of maternal deaths in the world. We have the quarter of the global child deaths. We have the highest proportion of malnutrition children. Over 20% of the youth 15 to 24 age are jobless. And between 2001 to 2011, around 46 farmers have committed suicide every day. This is
the raw data.
This is the raw data.
Right.
So, how many films?
So how much of social reality is being reflected in Indian cinema compared with the time when it was being, which started immediately after Pather Panchali? Satish Padmanabhan.
No, I mean, there is always this thing that if it is social, if a film reflects social reality, it has to be this dull, dark, kind of award-winning film. I mean, it needn't be. I mean, in fact, that is where Ray is such a great example. If you were to look at, urbanization, for instance, what he shows in Mahanagar is probably just a sort of a, look what is happening here now. I mean, look at a Gurgaon, look at these shiny big buildings coming from, people coming from small towns. I mean, there is migration. I mean, there's a fertile...
When you talk about dull drab, let me share with you this remarkable conversation I once had with M.S. Satyu. We are talking about communalism and filmmaking, given the fact that Garam Hawa remains one of the best possible film on partition. So we are talking about film. I said, Satyu, why don't you make a film now? So much is happening. We are talking this sometime in the mid-90s that we are talking about. He said, look, Mani Ratnam, Mani has made Bombay. He uses song and dance. It's a brilliant film. I said, why haven't you done it? He said, I don't have the talent for it. But I have no problems with Mani make such a brilliant film using the same narrative and the popular elements which go to make a film. Bombay eventually turned out to be one of the most biggest hits of its period. Right. Sushmita, this approach of looking down on what is popular, this I think needs a revisit. That anything which is popular is not bad, and anything which is good need not be, dense.
Right. Actually, popular is basically the politics of the people. What is the politics of the people? Presently, you see land, maternal mortality, child death, famine.
It's a reality, but it's not the politics.
It is not the politics. It is a reality, but it is not the politics. Because people have very different...
Well, if you get into actually the politics of the times, then it's even more problematic. I mean, I don't know which filmmaker will have the guts to...
There are two things. One is the state politics and the other is personal politics. Cinema is not state politics. People who have tried to make cinema on state politics have failed. The biggest debate between Godard and André Malraux is about this. So basically, you see, the French New Wave actually showed that filmmaking, the politics of cinema is personal politics. So our personal politics does not concern maternal death. Our personal politics does not concern child malnutrition. Our politics
See, when we talk
concerns
about
something
politics,
else.
when we talk about personals, you know, we are getting into the very fag end of the discussion. I couldn't but ask this one very quickly. Suppose we talk in terms of a sequel to Apu Sansar. You know, it's 60 years down the line. You know, Apu would possibly be either have already died or would have passed. So, Abhijit, suppose I ask you that how would you structure something like that? How would you imagine those characters very shortly? Same struggles or a different kind of struggles?
You see, every struggle is defined by the age. Since
Right.
the age has changed, his struggles would obviously be different. That's all I can say off the cuff.
How would
Yes,
you be?
it is very
How
clear.
would, can you just
It
quickly
is
imagine how would Kajol
yes,
be?
it is very clear in my mind.
Right.
You
Kajol
see,
would be about 60. You know?
60. So the kind of politics which Kajol has, Kajol's existence is always about moving ahead, maybe the struggles of everyday existence. But Opu's woes will still be the loss of authenticity,
Right.
of his own aristocracy. I think Opu would look like a Bishwambar of Jalshaghar.
I think that's well said. It's time for me to wind up this program. Thank you very much for coming and joining on this remarkable discussion on this really a spectacular film and a spectacular filmmaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Masters of 20th century cinema was separated from the rest by ambition. Akira Kurosawa, Ingrid Bergman, Fellini are just some of them. We all have our personal favorites. Satyajit Ray was one such master. His challenge was to make an extraordinary film from an everyday situation. After all, Apu's family was just like any other Indian family in rural India, struggling to make ends meet and not quite able to cope with modernity. The Apu trilogy was all about perception, that of the central character who starts off as a little child and matures into a young father by the end of the 3 films. Since perception was central to the films, I will leave you with your insight and your own interpretation. Do give us your feedback on this program and write to us. Our email ID is historylstv@gmail.com. We will return next week. There will be another page from history and another panel of experts. Till then, goodbye.